Join me as I dive into the chilling world of Gettysburg and try to uncover some ghost stories that are so wild you won't believe they actually happened. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, a place where the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest. Dubbed one of the most haunted places in America, this historic town has a dark history that continues to captivate and unsettle us to this day. Distinguishing between folklore and genuine ghostly encounters in Gettysburg can be a daunting task, with so many thrill-seeking tourists and paranormal enthusiasts visiting every year. It's easy to get caught up in the hype and lose sight of what's real, and what's just a cleverly crafted story. But for those who have experienced the paranormal firsthand, there's no denying the bone-chilling fear that comes with feeling like you're not alone. Gettysburg's rich history, coupled with its incredible energy, creates the perfect storm for the supernatural to thrive. You can't help but wonder, are these ghost stories merely a product of our vivid imaginations? Or is there something more sinister at play? The line between fact and fiction blurs when it comes to Gettysburg's most haunted locations. Take, for instance, the infamous Farnsworth House Inn, where countless guests and staff members have reported strange occurrences, from disembodied voices to apparitions in the mirror. Or what about the Jenny Wade House, where the first civilian casualty of the Battle of Gettysburg allegedly still roams the halls? The question remains, are these manifestations of the restless dead, or clever marketing ploys to attract visitors? It's cases like these that leave us questioning the nature of reality. We merely attributing human emotions and characteristics to inanimate objects, or is something more profound at play? The truth, much like the ghosts themselves, remains elusive. One thing's for certain, though, Gettysburg is a hotbed of paranormal activity that continues to fascinate and terrify us in equal measure. From the blood-soaked battlefields to the haunted taverns and inns, Gettysburg is a veritable treasure trove of spine-tingling ghost stories. Take, for example, the eerie tale of the Lady in White, who is said to appear to lone travelers on dark country roads, beckoning them to follow her into the depths of the forest. Or the story of the forgotten soldier who still patrols the grounds of the National Cemetery, searching for a way to escape the limbo of the afterlife. One of the most intriguing aspects of Gettysburg's paranormal scene is the sheer diversity of ghostly encounters, from full-bodied apparitions to unexplained noises and disembodied voices. The range of supernatural experiences is staggering, but what sets Gettysburg apart from other haunted hotspots is the sense of desperation that permeates every aspect of the town's history. This was a place where brother fought against brother, where the cries of the wounded and the dying still echo through the hills. There's one ghost story, however, that stands head and shoulders above the rest. A tale so shocking, so unbelievable that it has left even the most seasoned paranormal investigators speechless. It's the story of a group of visitors who, while exploring the abandoned Gettysburg Asylum, stumbled upon a mysterious door hidden behind a tattered curtain. What they uncovered was nothing short of astonishing, a room filled with the remnants of a bygone era, complete with rusted medical equipment, antique furniture, and, most chillingly, the words "Get out while you still can" scrawled in red ink on the walls. As we delve deeper into the heart of Gettysburg's most shocking ghost stories, it becomes increasingly clear that this is a place where the boundaries between reality and the unknown are blurred. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, there's no denying the visceral reaction that comes with exploring a place like Gettysburg. It's a town that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the nature of existence and the world beyond the grave. Gettysburg's haunted legacy continues to captivate us, a testament to the enduring power of the human psyche. It's a reminder that, no matter how much we think we've advanced as a species, we're still susceptible to the same primal fears that have haunted humanity since the dawn of time. As we bid farewell to this haunted haven, we're left with a sense of unease, a feeling that we've merely scratched the surface of a far greater mystery. What do you guys think about these spine-tingling ghost stories from Gettysburg? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And if you're ready to explore more haunted locations, be sure to check out our next video, where we'll delve into the darkest corners of America's most terrifying towns.
The Haunting of Gettysburg, Part 1. The night air in Gettysburg carried an almost electric charge. No stars showed above, clouds draped the sky in thick, colorless curtains, and the streetlights cast heavy shadows over the wet pavement. I was used to this place, it was the town where I'd grown up, steeped in history and myth, where nearly every local had a story of some ghostly encounter. But tonight felt wrong. Every inch of my skin crawled as if some unseen force had entered my personal space, watching, just close enough to unsettle me. My brother Michael and I had spent the evening at the Farnsworth House Inn. It was a curiosity to us as kids. The place people said was haunted by soldiers and spirits still stuck in the anguish of battle. Now, as adults, we'd gone back there, more curious than anything else, a bit amused at how locals like us could still get pulled into the supernatural allure. But by the time we left, the laughter had long since faded from our voices. As we walked past the Jenny Wade house on our way home, Michael's voice dropped to a low, unsettled tone. "You feel that?" I did. There was an intense chill, the kind you feel in a freezer left open too long. It ran over me like icy fingers clawing through the fog. I nodded, too unsettled to speak. "You remember that story Dad used to tell us?" he asked, scanning the house. "About Jenny Wade?" I glanced at the dimly lit building. "Yeah. He always used to swear he saw her once when he was young. Said she walked right past him, looked him dead in the eyes." Michael nodded. "Right. Said she was looking for something, or someone. Said she seemed lost." I could hear Dad's voice in my head, recounting it with the serious tone he reserved for the few things he actually believed. "She's a restless spirit," he'd always say, lowering his voice. "Stuck between worlds, caught up in the horror of what happened." Michael and I stopped for a moment, looking at the house, the only civilian casualty of the Battle of Gettysburg, where Jenny Wade had been struck down by a stray bullet while baking bread for soldiers. Her story was woven into the very fabric of the town. People claimed to see her roaming the halls, searching for the brother she'd loved and lost. Michael exhaled a misty breath. "We're being followed." I turned, sure he was trying to mess with me. But the hairs on my arms shot up. About 20 feet behind us, I saw a figure, a man, I thought. He was tall, in an old-style coat that looked like it belonged in a Civil War museum. His face was shadowed, and he walked with a slight limp, each step bringing a crunch that echoed through the quiet street. He seemed almost to blend with the fog, as though he wasn't entirely solid. "Do you see him?" Michael asked, his voice shaking. "Yes," I whispered. I couldn't bring myself to move, and my heart hammered painfully in my chest. The figure paused, and I watched as he lifted his head. His eyes, hollow and dark, bore into mine with an intensity that left me cold, numb, utterly frozen. And then he disappeared. The Haunting of Gettysburg, Part 2. The moment the figure vanished, the silence that followed was absolute, as if all the sounds of Gettysburg had dropped into a void. We stood there, locked in place, Michael's hand trembling as he gripped my shoulder. Did you see that?" he managed. I nodded, not trusting my voice to stay steady. Whatever we had just seen didn't belong here. It was part of the history trapped in the air, but somehow still alive, moving through the fog. We turned back to the road, moving faster this time, eager to get home and leave whatever dark shadows lurked in Gettysburg streets behind. But as we rounded a corner near the cemetery, the cold struck us again, harder this time, biting through our jackets, chilling us down to our bones. The mist had thickened, swirling in strange, unnatural patterns that seemed to close in around us. Michael stopped abruptly, grabbing my arm. "Look," he whispered, pointing ahead. Just beyond the iron gates of the cemetery, the fog seemed to part, revealing the faint glow of lanterns. The lights bobbed up and down, illuminating vague, shadowy figures that moved among the headstones. One of the figures separated from the rest, moving closer, and my heart dropped. It was a woman dressed in white, her form partially hidden by the mist. Her pale face was turned toward us, eyes vacant, unfocused, as though she was looking right through us. "Is that Jenny Wade?" Michael asked, barely above a whisper. The stories of Jenny's ghost were everywhere. But no one had ever claimed to see her out by the cemetery. She was supposed to be bound to her home, stuck there like an echo from the past. My mouth went dry as the figure's head tilted, and she began to walk slowly in our direction. The ground was wet, but her steps were silent. "Michael, don't move," I said, my voice tight. But he stepped back, his foot crunching on the gravel, and her gaze snapped to him. The cold seemed to thicken, freezing us in place as her hollow eyes locked onto him, widening with a look that chilled my blood. I felt something, maybe it was a surge of courage or maybe fear took over entirely, but I managed to grab Michael's arm and pull him. We sprinted down the road, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I didn't look back, and I prayed he didn't either. We finally stopped, both of us gasping for air, under the faint glow of the next street lamp. I chanced a glance back, half expecting her to be there, hovering just behind us, those dead, empty eyes fixed on us. But the street was silent, shrouded in a thin layer of mist that seemed to mock our fear with its quiet calm. That wasn't just some ghost story, was it? Michael's voice was hoarse, his face pale. "No," I said, still shivering despite the night warming slightly as we left the cemetery behind. It felt too real. Michael turned his gaze to the street ahead, and we started walking in silence. But as we neared our street, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. On the sidewalk, just a few steps away from our front door, was a single piece of paper. It was old, yellowed and brittle, as if it had been lying there for a century. "What is that?" Michael asked, staring down at it, his voice tight with suspicion. I bent down and picked it up, the paper crumbling slightly at the edges. My stomach twisted as I read the message scrawled in red ink. "Get out while you still can. The Haunting of Gettysburg, Part 3. We stood there, frozen, the eerie message hovering between us like a thin layer of fog we couldn't clear. Michael snatched the paper from my hands, his face pale but resolute. This has to be a prank, right?" His voice was forced, wavering. I wanted to agree. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't some prank, and it wasn't just a ghost story passed around town to scare tourists. It was a warning, and we'd made the mistake of ignoring it. I forced a nod, more for his sake than mine. "Probably. Maybe it's just, I don't know, a joke for the Halloween tours." I barely believed my own words, and by Michael's expression, he didn't either. We headed into the house, each room feeling colder than usual, the air heavy with an oppressive weight. I closed the door behind us, turned the locks, and pulled the curtains tight. The town outside felt like another world entirely, a place where the dead could walk freely, where shadows moved with a life of their own. As I stepped into the kitchen, I nearly tripped over something lying in the doorway. I knelt down to get a better look, my pulse quickening. It was a small, weathered coin, tarnished and worn down, with a date faintly visible, star 1863 star. Michael's eyes widened as he leaned down beside me. "Isn't that the year of the battle?" "Yes," I whispered, holding it up to the light. "It's the same year Jenny Wade was killed." My words hung in the air like a curse, and suddenly every sound, every creak in the house seemed amplified. Then came a sound from upstairs. It was soft, like the shuffle of footsteps or the brushing of fabric against the walls. We looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between us. It was just the two of us here, there shouldn't have been anyone else in the house. But the sound persisted, growing louder, as if whatever was up there was slowly moving toward the stairs. Did you leave a window open?" Michael whispered, barely audible. "No," I replied, the lie slipping out before I could stop myself. In truth, I didn't remember if I had. But even if I had, there was no way anyone could have gotten in, at least, no one human. We stood there in the kitchen, our breaths held, listening as the footsteps descended one slow, deliberate step at a time. And then, just as suddenly as they'd begun, they stopped. Complete silence filled the house. I couldn't bear it anymore. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a heavy candle holder, and stepped forward, inching toward the staircase. Michael was right behind me, his hand clutching a flashlight he'd found in the drawer. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, something metallic glinted in the dim light. There, resting on the first step, was another coin, identical to the one we'd found in the kitchen, the date barely visible, 1863. It's like it's leaving a trail, Michael muttered, fear saturating every syllable. A chill ran down my spine. I lifted the coin, but it was ice cold, far colder than the room, almost painful to touch. I dropped it, my fingers stinging. The metal echoed dully as it hit the floor, and in that brief instant, the oppressive silence shattered. The door at the top of the stairs swung open. And in the dim, shadowed space, a figure loomed. A man in a tattered, blood-stained coat, his eyes hollow, black pits that seemed to drink in the darkness around him. His gaze was fixed on us, unblinking, unyielding, as though he saw something he hadn't in decades. Michael gasped, and before I could stop him, he took a step back. The figure's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile in another life, a grotesque mockery of expression. "Did you hear that?" he rasped, his voice like sandpaper, like the wind howling through a barren graveyard. "Hear what?" Michael stammered. "The gunfire," he replied, a spark of panic in his dead eyes. "It's all around, can't you hear it?" The room filled with a deafening, phantom roar. It was as if the walls were tearing apart with the sound of cannons and musket fire, voices screaming, groaning in agony, reliving the horrors of battle. And then, just as abruptly, the noises stopped. The figure at the top of the stairs let out a sigh, as though his entire being had been waiting for that silence. And with one last hollow stare, he turned, drifting back into the darkness, leaving us paralyzed at the foot of the stairs, clinging to each other in terror. The Haunting of Gettysburg, Part 4. Neither of us moved. We just stood there, paralyzed, my hand gripping Michael's arm so tightly it must have hurt. That figure, that soldier, whatever he was, had felt so real, so alive. The sounds of battle still echoed faintly in my ears, as if they'd branded themselves into my mind. "What was that?" Michael finally whispered, his face pale, his voice hollow. I shook my head, words failing me. Gettysburg was famous for its ghosts, but I'd always thought of them as stories, something to make tourists jump. This was no story. I could still smell the faint scent of gunpowder in the air, feel the chill left behind by his presence. The coin lay on the step, a cold, metallic reminder of what we'd just seen. I reached for it, despite the cold bite it left on my fingers, and placed it on the countertop as we backed into the kitchen, desperate to put as much distance as we could between us and whatever haunted our stairs. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, broken only by the hum of the fridge. I almost laughed at the sound, mundane and steady, as if mocking the horror we'd just witnessed. But then I heard it again, a faint whisper, drifting through the house like a gust of wind carrying secrets from the past. "It's coming from the living room," Michael whispered, dread etched on his face. We crept toward the doorway, leaning around the frame to peer into the dim room. At first, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just the familiar shadows of furniture, the gentle sway of the curtains in the evening breeze. But then my eyes landed on something out of place, a figure sitting in Dad's old armchair, facing away from us. The shape was all wrong. It was small, hunched over, covered by what looked like an old, ragged shawl. My heart pounded as I reached for Michael's hand, squeezing it hard, hoping to God he wouldn't scream. He didn't. He was staring, transfixed, as the figure slowly turned to face us. A woman's face came into view, hollow eyes fixed in an unseeing stare, her mouth stretched into a wide, sorrowful smile. She looked ancient, her skin paper-thin, her face marked with a strange, bluish tint, like someone who had been left out in the cold far too long. "Jenny Wade?" I choked out, the name escaping before I could stop it. The figure shook her head slowly, the movement creaking like old wood. Her hand rose, pointing directly at us, a skeletal finger extending from beneath the shawl. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, as if she was trying to speak from some distant place. What do you want?" Michael asked, his voice wavering, barely audible. Her expression darkened, and for a brief second, I thought I saw something flicker behind her empty eyes, a spark of anger or desperation. She rose from the chair, her thin frame looming over us, her finger still pointing, as if demanding something, her mouth moving in silent fury. And then I heard it, a single word, faint, like a whisper carried across time. "Help." She took a step toward us, her movements jerky, unnatural. We stumbled back into the kitchen, nearly tripping over each other. My mind raced, trying to piece together what she was asking, what it could mean. But as I backed into the counter, my hand landed on something hard and cold. The coin. 1863. That's when it hit me. The battle. The dead. So many lives lost in those few, bloody days. They weren't just restless spirits, they were desperate. Stuck in some kind of hellish loop, searching for release, for something beyond this world, something none of them could find alone. We can't help you," I shouted, feeling a pang of guilt as I said it, knowing it was true. Whatever these spirits wanted, whatever was binding them here, it was beyond anything we could give them. Her face twisted into a look of pure sorrow, and then she vanished, dissolving into the shadows. The room fell silent once more, leaving only the faint creak of the floorboards settling. Michael let out a shuddering breath, his hand still clamped onto my shoulder. "We have to get out of here. We need to leave, now." I nodded, no longer questioning him. We grabbed our jackets, heading for the door, when something else caught my eye, a glint of red on the wall, right above the spot where the woman had stood. Words were scrawled there in what looked like dark, dried blood. Find him. Release us, A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the message, the finality of it, as if every spirit bound to Gettysburg had left their mark, their plea, right here in our house. "What does it mean?" Michael asked, his voice hollow. "I don't know," I replied, but a dark certainty was forming in my mind. Whatever this meant, whatever horror these spirits were trapped in, they were desperate to escape. And somehow, they'd pulled us into their nightmare. The Haunting of Gettysburg, Part 5. Outside, the mist had thickened, cloaking the streets in an impenetrable fog. The silence of Gettysburg was unsettling, it felt as though the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. We couldn't stay in the house, but I wasn't entirely sure we were safer out here. Yet, leaving felt like our only option, so we ventured out, hoping the cold air might clear our minds. The streets felt deserted, every shadow holding its own dark secrets. As we walked, Michael and I kept glancing back, as if expecting one of the specters from the house to follow us. The weight of the message, find him. Release us, hung between us, as heavy as the fog. But it was the coins that gnawed at me. Why had we been left with them? It was as though they were some kind of clue, or maybe even a piece of a curse. Either way, they felt like anchors tying us to whatever haunted this town. Where do we even start? Michael muttered, stuffing his hands into his pockets to ward off the cold. How do we find him? There were thousands of soldiers who died here. How do we know which one is keeping them here? I shook my head, too weary to answer. But then, as we passed the old Gettysburg Asylum, a building I'd never dared to enter, I felt an overwhelming urge to stop. The place was known to be haunted, the stories about it ranging from tragic to terrifying, yet the longer I stood there, the stronger the pull became. "Do you feel that?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Michael hesitated, looking up at the darkened windows. "Yeah," he murmured, shivering. "But are you sure we should?" I didn't wait for him to finish. Compelled by something beyond my own reason, I stepped through the broken gate and onto the asylum grounds. It felt like the spirits themselves were guiding me, urging me forward. Each step I took seemed heavier, as though the earth was weighted with the sorrow and suffering of those who'd been here. Michael followed reluctantly, muttering under his breath, but he kept close, his footsteps echoing my own. The building loomed ahead of us, its facade cracked and weathered, a testament to years of decay. But as we neared the entrance, the air grew colder, sharper, biting into my skin. With a deep breath, I pushed open the heavy doors, and they creaked open, releasing a rush of stale air that smelled of dust and something far worse, a faint, metallic tang, like old blood. Inside, the halls were a shadowed maze of peeling wallpaper and rusted metal. The darkness felt alive, pressing in on us, filled with a silence so intense that every footstep seemed to echo. We turned a corner, and suddenly the temperature dropped even further. Goosebumps prickled my skin, and I could see my breath, white and misty, hanging in the air. Then, from deep within the corridor, we heard it, a voice. Soft, almost like a whisper, but distinct. "Please, let me out." We froze, our eyes locked, both of us feeling the same sickening dread. It was coming from somewhere ahead, drawing us deeper into the asylum's dark, winding corridors. I gripped Michael's arm. That voice, do you hear it?" He nodded, his face pale. "We need to keep going," he whispered, his voice strained, as though he was convincing himself more than me. Following the voice, we moved forward, guided by the faint, sorrowful pleas. It was only as we neared the end of the hallway that we saw it, a single door, hidden behind a tattered, faded curtain. It looked different from the others, older, as though it had been here long before the asylum was even built. Michael reached out, pushing the curtain aside, revealing the words scratched into the wood, "Leave this place. While you still can, But it was too late to turn back. We were already caught in the asylum's dark web, and something compelled me to reach for the door handle, cold as ice, and turn it. The door groaned open, revealing a small room filled with strange relics, rusted medical equipment, yellowed papers, and one thing that stole the breath from my lungs. On the far wall, written in that same, dark scrawl, were the words we'd seen in our house, "Find him. Release us, The message was surrounded by countless names, scratched over and over, their letters jagged and desperate. And in the middle of it all, circled in a dark, furious spiral, was one name. Thomas W. Greer. Michael stared at the name, his brow furrowing as he tried to place it. That name. I feel like I've seen it before. Somewhere in the old town records, maybe. I barely heard him, transfixed by the markings on the wall. Thomas W. Greer, the name resonated in my mind, filling me with a sense of dread and purpose. This was the soldier, the one whose spirit had been bound here, keeping the others from finding peace. "We have to find his grave," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What? How will that help?" Michael asked, but I could see he was already on board. The pull was stronger than any fear we felt, leading us, binding us to the spirit of Thomas Greer. We turned back, leaving the asylum's shadows behind, and ventured toward the cemetery. It was a long walk, made even longer by the weight of the coins still in my pocket, their metallic chill pressing into my skin. When we reached the cemetery, the fog had thickened, turning the graves into shadowy figures standing guard over the dead. We walked row by row, scanning each headstone, desperate to find the one name that would release the town from its haunting. And then, finally, we found it. Private Thomas W. Greer. 1863 His headstone was modest, barely noticeable among the others, but the moment I saw it, a rush of energy seemed to sweep through the air, like the exhale of 1,000 unseen souls. Michael pulled the coins from his pocket and placed them on the grave, the metal clinking softly against the stone. As we stepped back, the fog around us seemed to ripple, shifting, alive with unseen movement. And then we saw them, figures rising from the mist, hundreds of them, their faces worn, their eyes dark with the weight of centuries. They gathered around the grave, their heads bowed, their voices a soft, murmuring chorus. One figure stepped forward, the soldier we'd seen at our house, his hollow gaze now filled with something that looked like peace. He nodded to us, a silent gesture of thanks, and then, like mist dispersing in the morning light, he vanished, along with every other figure, leaving the cemetery silent once more. The air grew warm again, and the fog lifted, revealing the town bathed in the first light of dawn. Michael and I stood there, staring at the empty space where they'd been, the weight finally lifting from our shoulders. Gettysburg had been haunted for so long, its spirits bound to their torment. But now, the town felt lighter, almost as if it, too, could finally rest. As we walked home in silence, the first rays of sunlight spilling over the horizon, I glanced back at the cemetery one last time. For the first time, there was nothing there but quiet peace.